had no knowledge of what was to come, nor did I care. How the knowledge changed me, it will also change you. As you read this, you'll come to learn fear as I have. You too will come to understand, or you will perish. To think that once I cannot see beyond the veil of our reality, to see those who lie behind. My life now has purpose, for I've learned the frailty of flesh and bone. I was once a fool. Those are the first words written in an ancient and horrific tome that's content span much of the length of human history. Many before you have immortalized their tales inside, and many after will succumb to it as well. If you dare look upon its words, you'll be gifted with incomprehensible knowledge, that of which almost no human has ever wielded, but at a dire cost. Insanity, paranoia, and a bone-chilling fear will haunt you for as long as you live, as what's held within this book was never meant to be seen by the likes of mere mortals. Not only this, but you'll find yourself entangled in a terrible and vast conflict that has raged as long as time itself, and that may consume your very being. Are you prepared for what lies ahead? Will your sanity stay intact on the journey through the depths of reality and back? Well, in 2002, Silicon Knights let you find out in their point-and-click-esque horror classic, Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. In this game, you start as Alex Roivas, who's awoken one night by a call from the police. A detective tells her that something horrible has happened to her grandfather, and that as the only living relative, she should come down to his estate as soon as possible. Upon arrival, the situation only gets worse as the detective reveals that her grandfather was seemingly murdered in his own home, with zero signs of forced entry or evidence they could find as leads. In shock and unwilling to accept this news, Alex decides that she'll take matter into her own hands and find out the truth of what happened to her family, no matter how long it takes. To do this, Alex locks herself away in the estate and begins combing through every last corner in search of the answers she seeks. Sure enough, mysterious clues begin popping up, seemingly leading her on a trail set by her grandfather himself. The first of these clues leads Alex straight to a hidden study of sorts, filled with relics from ages past, and right in the center of them lays a mysterious book named the Tome of Eternal Darkness. Through this 15 or so hour Lovecraftian adventure, you'll be uncovering the rest of the secrets the estate holds within, and delving into the maddening pages of the tome, one chapter at a time. Playing a central role in the events of the game, the tome allows you to follow the history of humanity itself, all the way from Roman times up until modern day in 12 different chapters. Each of these centers around a different character and a specific time period, and reveals techniques for new abilities or information that help Alex solve the mystery of her grandfather's death. To make it through these individual chapters, you'll have to brave the darkest depths imaginable and fight back against unholy creatures straight out of hell itself. These very chapters highlight one of the strongest aspects of Eternal Darkness in its masterful storytelling, and its ability to seamlessly have all of the separate tales held within come together to weave a brilliantly creepy and cohesive narrative. You'd think that having 12 playable characters all with their own goals and personalities would lead to a confusing or disjointed game, but in fact it worked fantastically well, and that's what really makes the game stand out from its peers. Seeing what twists and turns each chapter held, and learning more about the disturbing and downright demonic world of this game was an absolute blast. Eternal Darkness has to be among the greatest Lovecraftian games ever made, and in terms of narrative, might actually surpass other titles I've covered in similar settings, like Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. Bolstering the gripping story are visuals that are still remarkably beautiful even 20 plus years later. For a game released in 2002, Eternal Darkness looks downright fantastic at times, creating extremely immersive surroundings for all your horrific adventures. You'll make your way through arid deserts, trap-filled temples, and otherworldly crypts and tombs, all filled with era-specific set dressings and effects to set the scene. You even get to revisit each of these areas, sometimes hundreds of years after your initial excursions, seeing all manner of changes to the layouts and looks. I did at times feel that the amount of retracing your steps and reuse of levels bordered on the excessive, but luckily the end result on offer here still managed to be varied and memorable enough to remain extremely engaging throughout. After the story comes the second most prevalent aspect of this title, in the combat. Throughout your playthrough, you'll encounter a variety of different undead and monstrous foes that will threaten not just your well-being, but your sanity too. To dispatch these beasts, you'll be given a number of tools of destruction, ranging from swords and maces, to guns, blow darts, and even magical spells. When using your traditional weapons, you'll be able to target specific parts of enemies, like individual limbs or weak points, slicing off entire arms or decapitating some foes in epic fashion. Each enemy comes with different weaknesses that you can discover, forcing you to use varied tactics to take them all down. While your basic undead may be more susceptible to simple melee hacks and slashes, others will force you to exploit weaknesses like gaps in armor or vulnerability to ranged attacks. In turn, however, many enemies come with their own strengths and abilities, like the power to disguise themselves as humans, with a knowledge on how to cast deadly spells at you from a range. After sufficiently dealing a large enough amount of damage to your adversaries though, many enemies will collapse to the floor, allowing you to deal a finishing blow to them, ending their evil once and for all. Interestingly, if left knocked down for too long, some foes can actually get back up and return to the fight, possibly catching you off guard when you least expect it, and adding yet another fun dimension to each battle. Then add in the magic system, which allows you to make use of around 12 or 13 different spells, and you really have the ability to take on each and every encounter from a unique angle. This spell system here is unlike any I've seen, as instead of having a simple spell list, you end up finding and learning a large number of rune symbols. When these rune symbols are combined in sets of 3, 5, or 7, they make up all manner of spells at varying degrees of power. Examples of some of my favorite spells would be the damage field, which puts up a magical barrier around a specific area, or the summoning spells that allow you to take control of a few of the enemies in the game and give the demonic hordes a taste of their own medicine. The magic spells really added a new dimension to the combat, and in all honesty, they were needed in some of the later game fights, as without them, you would get steamrolled by some of the hulking monstrosities you encounter. In many cases, magic is balanced by the fact that it would take much longer to cast than it would to strike with a traditional weapon. This in some ways forces you to rely on all forms of combat in order to survive. A go-to method I would use is to cast a magical shield on myself, then create a mystical barrier blocking off a certain area, only to follow that by getting out a weapon that was effective in this fight and drawing the enemies into my choke point. Essentially, I thought the combat was decently entertaining, and that the variety of around 25 weapons you encounter kept things just about fun enough for the playthrough. There are issues I had with it, however, and the first of these is that the later game magic spells can allow you to cheese many encounters like this one here. Once you get a good feel for spells like this, nearly any encounter outside of the few boss fights can be cheesed. That, along with the fixed camera perspectives and semi-awkward lockup mechanics, can lead to the combat in many cases feeling a bit clunky in all honesty. If the game was completely combat driven, this would be more damning, but the fact that Eternal Darkness is essentially a point-and-click game makes me much more forgiving of its clunky moments, as in all honesty it might have the best combat of any game in that genre, and has much more to offer than just that. Outside of that, I did also have a few other issues while playing. To purchase Eternal Darkness, you would either have to buy a physical copy for the GameCube, or emulate it using a program like Dolphin as I did. The emulated version is able to be bumped up to higher resolutions, and even has a fan-made HD texture pack that I used, which improved on the already fantastic visuals even more. This version of the game is not perfect, however, as I couldn't seem to get the game to properly fit on my screen at 1440p unless I stretched it. This resulted in small black bars being visible on the sides of my screen during gameplay sections, and the cutscenes only filling about half of the screen when they played. I didn't necessarily mind this, as it doesn't detract too much from the experience, but I figured I should mention it either way. Moving back onto the positives, I want to touch on the puzzles in the game, as these are going to be your main obstacles and objectives through most of the runtime. Like many point-and-click or adventure games, you'll encounter roadblocks in your journey to uncovering the secrets of the Tome and your grandfather's death. These will come in many forms, such as an invisible door, a locked safe, or a number of different environmental or color-related problems to solve. Starting off pretty simple, these puzzles or roadblocks will only require you to do something like matching colors or finding a hidden key to progress. As you get around the halfway point, however, and your list of spells and knowledge increases, you'll be tasked with solving much more difficult problems. These are going to require you to have explored your surroundings thoroughly, and to have a good understanding of the magic system in order to beat them. Point-and-click titles of old are sort of infamous for making you jump through nonsensical hoops that the average person struggles to figure out in order to progress. But I can luckily say that Eternal Darkness manages to mostly avoid this issue. Generally, there will be some form of subtle hint, be it a note, a map marker, or some dialogue that'll guide you to where you're supposed to be going. In addition to this, the chapter levels where you play as a character in a specific area usually serve the side purpose of familiarizing you with a new mechanic, so that when you encounter it later in a puzzle, you'll have the knowledge on how to overcome it. this all resulted in what I felt like was one of the most fair point-and-click game experiences I've ever seen. Puzzles will be hard and force you to think, but almost never too hard that you won't be able to solve them. The balance and difficulty of mechanics like this can be really hard to get right, and for adventure games, vital to how fun the end experience is. I'm happy to say though that Silicon Knights did a really good job for the most part in making these sections fun and not irritating. They even managed to sort of combine the puzzle and combat aspects of the game into the few boss fights you'll encounter too. Each boss sort of serves as a problem of its own, requiring you to figure out what spells are required to defeat them. I felt these sections were among the most cinematic moments of the game, but I didn't think all of them were necessarily executed perfectly. Near the halfway point of the game, you'll fight a giant boss with multiple stages that requires you to get such stupidly precise timing with spells that it took me ages to figure out if what I was trying to do was even correct or working at all, as there was really no prior explanation or set of hints for this section. I can happily say that the final boss was much less frustrating than that though, and provided for a great conclusion to the game that left me with an overall good impression. To sum up my thoughts on the puzzles, I thought they were fun and just challenging enough almost all of the time to make for a great experience in any playthrough. Next, we get onto a mechanic that this game is sort of famous for, being the insanity. Each character of the game will have a few status bars, being health, mana, and sanity. Horrific sights and enemies you encounter will generally drain the sanity bar, and as it gets lower and lower, strange things will start happening around you. These instances may begin with blood oozing from the wall or eerie footsteps behind you. Once the sanity bar gets really low though, the game will straight up start trying to make you think you're crazy at times. Statues will stare at you as you walk past, doors won't lead you to the right place, your character will begin muttering to themselves, and the game will try to pull some hilarious fourth wall breaking type shenanigans on you. Eternal Darkness will try to convince you that it's broken, or that you've messed with the settings by pretending it's been muted, or that you changed the input on your TV. I won't spoil all these, but some of the tricks it pulls were actually really clever and well thought out. A few of these don't necessarily work that well anymore, as they were made assuming you were using an old CRT TV, but others actually made me laugh out loud as I seriously thought they were real. This is an insanely cool mechanic that, like the combat, adds new dimensions to what could have just been an ordinary point-and-click adventure title. Well folks, that should about give you a general idea of what you'll get from this horror cult classic. I went in honestly not really knowing what to expect, or even what type of game this was, but was left pleasantly surprised as Eternal Darkness incorporates some amazing narrative and thematic elements that I can honestly say I have never seen before. The story here is really cool, and the characters and time periods you visit are all distinctly memorable, touching on some eras that are rarely seen in the media and that you may not expect. On top of that, Eternal Darkness allows you to pick different paths each time you play it, giving the villain different motivations for his actions, and adding new cutscenes and changing up some of the enemies and bosses. If you beat the game a couple times, you unlock a god mode of sorts as well as a level select, and once you beat all 3 variants the game offers, you're even treated to a special extra cutscene that provides a definitive ending to the overarching story. With all these wonderfully creative mechanics, beautiful environments, and additional replayability added in, it's pretty clear that this game is a solid package that any fan of creepy Lovecraft settings or traditional adventure games is sure to love. In addition, it's also just an interesting piece of history to check out, as this game is one of the only M-rated games that Nintendo has ever published. For all these reasons and more, I'm giving Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem an 8.5 out of 10.